They say evil doesn't knock. It slips in through the cracks in your walls, whispers through the shadows in your room, and waits until you're too tired, too weak to resist. But what if evil was different? What if it did knock softly, politely, with the voice of a child asking for help? Would you open the door? It was just after midnight when Daniel first heard it. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the front door of his quiet suburban home. He figured it was just some teenagers messing around, a prank to break the monotony of a Tuesday night. Annoyed, he got up and peered through the peephole. But what he saw wasn't a group of mischievous teens. He saw 2 children. They stood perfectly still on his porch, their faces pale under the dim glow of the street lamp, motionless, and their eyes were wrong. They were black, not dark brown, not shadowed by the night. They were completely, impossibly black, solid voids staring back at him. Daniel froze, his hand still on the doorknob. The boy, who looked no older than 10, spoke. His voice was flat, mechanical, as if he were reciting a line from a script. "Sir, we're lost. Can we come in?" The girl beside him, a little younger, tilted her head, and her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was empty, a hollow gesture. "We need to call our mother," she added, her voice just as monotone. Daniel's gut twisted into a knot. Everything about this felt wrong. Their voices were too calm, too deliberate for lost children. He took a closer look at their clothes. They were old-fashioned, worn but clean, looking like they'd stepped out of a family photograph from the 1980s. The air around them felt heavy, charged, as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do. That's when he remembered it. A story he'd heard years ago, whispered across the sticky surface of a bar late one night. An urban legend, a spooky tale. If black-eyed children knock, whatever you do, do not open the door. He backed away from the peephole, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum. The knocking started again, louder this time. It wasn't frantic or desperate, not the sound of children in distress. It was steady, patient, relentless. "Sir, please," the boy's voice drifted through the door, unnervingly clear. "We can't come in unless you invite us." That sentence sent a shiver down his spine. They needed his permission. They needed to be invited. Daniel didn't answer. He just stood there in his dark hallway, listening until the knocking finally stopped and the oppressive feeling began to fade. The next morning, the bright sunlight made the night's events feel like a bizarre dream. But the memory was too vivid. While getting his mail, he saw his neighbor, Mrs. Carter, tending to her garden. He decided to tell her, maybe just to hear someone say he was overreacting. He described the children, their clothes, their voices, and those awful empty eyes. As he spoke, Mrs. Carter's face drained of all color. Her gardening trowel slipped from her hand and clattered onto the pavement. She looked around, her eyes wide with fear, and whispered, "They came to me last winter." Daniel's blood ran cold. I let them in," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "I thought they were cold. Ever since that night," she said, her house had been different. She kept the curtains drawn tight, day and night. The lights would flicker at odd hours. And her husband, a man who was once the cheerful heart of the neighborhood, now just sat in their yard for hours on end, staring blankly at nothing, unresponsive. The story started to spread through the neighborhood like a virus. More families had seen them. The experiences were always the same. They always appeared at night. They were always polite. They always asked for permission to enter, and they always had those eyes black, soulless voids that seemed to swallow your very soul. A wave of paranoia swept over the community. Some families packed up and moved away without so much as a goodbye. Others, like Daniel, became prisoners in their own homes, boarding up windows and reinforcing their doors. But the children kept coming, their patient knocks echoing through the terrified, silent streets. The neighborhood was no longer a safe, peaceful suburb. It was a hunting ground. One night, about a week after his encounter, Daniel's phone rang, shattering the tense silence of his house. It was Mrs. Carter. Her voice was trembling, choked with panic. "They're inside again," she cried. "They just appeared. I can't make them leave. Please, you have to help me." Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy flashlight and rushed over to her house next door. The front door was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. A single lamp was on inside, casting long, distorted shadows across the living room. And there they were. The same two children, standing perfectly still in the middle of the room, their pale faces turned towards him. Their black eyes locked onto his. The boy spoke, his voice the same flat tone he remembered. "You shouldn't have come." As the words left his lips, the lamp flickered violently. The air grew impossibly cold, and Daniel felt an immense pressure on his chest, as if invisible hands were squeezing the very breath from his lungs. He stumbled back, gasping for air, and fled from the house, not daring to look back. He ran back to his own home, slammed the door, and slid the deadbolt. He didn't hear from Mrs. Carter again. The next day, her house was empty. She and her husband were gone. Desperate for answers, Daniel fell down a rabbit hole of late-night internet searches. He scoured forums, conspiracy blogs, and digitized archives of old newspaper clippings. The stories were everywhere, spanning decades and continents, but they were all terrifyingly similar. Black-eyed children appearing on doorsteps, politely asking to be let in. Those who refused were haunted by relentless nightmares and a lingering sense of dread, but those who allowed them inside were never the same. Some disappeared entirely. Others were found changed, their personalities erased, left as empty shells. The theories were wild. Some accounts claimed the children were demons or the spirits of the damned, forever seeking a place to rest. Others speculated they were some kind of alien-human hybrid, sent to test human compassion and fear. But the most chilling theory, the one that made Daniel's skin crawl, was that they weren't asking for help at all. They were omens harbingers of death, pestilence, and despair. Weeks passed. Daniel tried to return to normal, to ignore the whispers he thought he heard at the edge of his hearing, to dismiss the shadows that moved just at the edge of his vision. He became a recluse, his world shrinking to the four walls of his fortified home. But one night, the knock returned. This time it was louder, more insistent. A powerful thudding that seemed to shake the entire house. He didn't need to look through the peephole. He knew who it was. "Sir," the boy's voice echoed through the wood, no longer polite, but cold and commanding. And then, silence, a deafening, absolute silence. Daniel stood frozen in the dark, sweat dripping from his face, his breath held tight in his chest. Slowly, against his will, he felt his arm begin to rise. His hand reached for the door handle. His mind screamed, a torrent of panic and denial, but his body moved on its own, as if pulled by invisible strings. The rule, the one rule he had clung to for weeks, was clear: do not open the door. But what happens when the choice is no longer yours? His fingers wrapped around the cold metal, the handle turned, the lock clicked open. The door creaked open on its own, revealing the moonlit porch, and he saw them closer than ever before. Their pale faces were inches from his, their eyes to endless oceans of black, drawing him in. They stepped forward, across the threshold. He tried to scream, to fight, to run, but no sound came out. No muscle would obey. The little girl looked up at him, and her lips formed that same empty smile. She whispered, "You invited us." The next morning, Daniel's house was quiet. To quiet. His car was still parked in the driveway. The living room lights were on, but Daniel was gone. The neighbors whispered among themselves. Some claimed they saw him late that night, walking down the street between the two children, his head bowed, his eyes as black as theirs. Others said the house itself was now cursed, that if you stood outside, you could still hear the faint sound of knocking, even in the middle of the day. And so the legend grew, another story added to the countless others. So if you ever hear that knock at midnight, soft and polite, and you look outside to see children waiting on your doorstep, remember Daniel. Do not open the door, do not speak to them, and whatever you do, do not look for too long into their eyes. Because once you do, they will never truly leave. And one day, you might just find yourself standing beside them, knocking on someone else's door, waiting to be invited in. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to follow for more tales from the shadows.